You think your family can't surprise you anymore, until one day they do something so outrageous it nearly gets you thrown in prison. That's what happened when my sister decided to borrow some of my gear for a date. She thought it was just a rugged, heavy-duty gadget I used for work, maybe something like an expensive camping tool or a tough-looking backpack. In reality, what she casually grabbed was a piece of military technology worth over $2 million, guarded under strict security and meant only for trained personnel like me. Imagine the panic flooding through me when I realized it was gone. This wasn't some misplaced phone or a borrowed jacket. This was a classified government-issued device, something that if it fell into the wrong hands, could compromise lives, missions, and national security. My heart pounded as if someone had just handed me a death sentence. I tried to stay calm, but my mind kept spiraling. What if her date noticed the strange-looking gear? What if he asked questions? What if she accidentally pressed the wrong button? Every scenario ended with disaster. Sirens, interrogations, and headlines screaming about negligence. The worst part. My sister had no idea what she was carrying. To her, it was just a cool, tactical-looking thing that would make her look adventurous and edgy in front of her new boyfriend. She had no clue she was walking around the city like a ticking bomb disguised as a fashion accessory. That night turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. One where family drama collided head-on with military secrets, and I had to choose between protecting my sister or protecting my career, my freedom, and possibly even my country. It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday afternoon, the kind where the house felt quieter than usual, sunlight spilled lazily through the blinds, and I could finally let my body rest after a week of endless training drills. My mind was heavy with exhaustion but light with the comfort of being home. I remember tossing my boots aside, the echo of them hitting the floor filling the small room, and sinking onto my bed with a sigh that carried all the weight of the week behind it. The air smelled faintly of coffee and the faint polish I used to clean my gear. I glanced toward the corner where my black case rested, locked and secure, containing something that wasn't supposed to be in my bedroom at all. Something meant only for military hands, and hands that had clearance like mine. It looked ordinary enough. Just a heavy case with reinforced edges, but the truth inside it was worth millions and carried the kind of responsibility that could crush a man if he failed to guard it. I had lived with that responsibility for long enough that it no longer startled me. The military trained me to carry things heavier than fear. But the rule was clear. That gear should never leave secure grounds unless authorized, never leave my sight, never fall into untrained hands. It wasn't a toy. And it wasn't a piece of fancy camping equipment. It was the kind of thing that, if misused, could make front-page headlines, the kind of thing that could end careers or lives. That's why I treated it with the same seriousness you'd treat a loaded weapon. Yet in that moment, tired and careless, I let myself drift into the dangerous comfort of routine. I told myself it was safe in the case, safe in the corner of my room, safe because nobody in this house would ever touch it. My sister had been in and out of my room earlier, but I hadn't noticed much. She had a way of talking fast about dates and dresses and little dramas that never mattered to me. She'd come to show me her new outfit for the night, spinning in the doorway like she was auditioning for a part in some romance film. I barely looked up. I just grunted, told her she looked fine, and went back to scrolling through my phone. She asked something about borrowing a jacket, maybe a watch, but I didn't pay enough attention to answer clearly. If I had looked closer, if I had actually lifted my head, I might have noticed her eyes wandering toward the corner. I might have noticed curiosity spark in her expression. But I didn't. I only heard her footsteps fade down the hall, and the sound of the front door closing. It was nearly an hour later when I noticed something was wrong. I got up to grab a glass of water, walked back into my room, and let my eyes rest casually on the corner where the case sat. The sight nearly stopped my heart. The case was open. Not wide, just enough to show me its lock had been tampered with. The latch hung loose, and the gear inside, the gear worth $2 million, was gone. For a second my brain refused to process it. I blinked, convinced it was just my tired eyes playing tricks. But no. The case was empty. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, colder. My throat tightened. My first thought was simple. Report it immediately. That was the rule. Call the commanding officer, explain the breach, deal with the punishment that would surely follow. But then my second thought came, darker and sharper. My sister. She was the only one in this house reckless enough to touch what wasn't hers. She was the only one who might mistake a dangerous asset for a cool-looking gadget. My knees felt weak as the image of her popped into my mind. Her laughing, carefree, walking out the door with something she couldn't possibly understand. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed her number. No answer. I called again, then again, until my thumb ached from the repetition. Still nothing. I sent a text, one word that carried every ounce of my panic. Call. No reply. My pulse hammered against my temples. I could already imagine the questions from my superiors if this ever came to light. How did she get it? Why wasn't it secured? Why didn't I stop her? Every answer would make me sound careless, incompetent, untrustworthy. And incompetence with this kind of asset wasn't something they forgave. Minutes dragged like hours until finally my phone buzzed. Relief flooded me as I unlocked it, only to have that relief turn into horror. It wasn't a message. It was a photo. My sister had sent me a smiling selfie with her date, taken at what looked like a cafe. And there, right on the table in front of her like it was just another accessory, was the gear. She was holding it with one hand, tilting it like it was some kind of futuristic handbag, flashing her perfect smile as if she had just discovered the ultimate fashion statement. Her caption read, "Check out my new toy." Cool, right? I nearly dropped the phone. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. My own sister, the girl who still believed romance movies were real life, was sitting in public with $2 million worth of classified technology laid bare in front of strangers. She didn't even know what it was, and that ignorance made her dangerous. What if she pushed a button by accident? What if someone else noticed it, recognized it, tried to take it? Every second it stayed in her hands was another second closer to disaster. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house. My car roared to life, and I drove like the devil himself was chasing me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind raced faster than the engine. Every traffic light felt like an enemy, every passing second another risk of exposure. I rehearsed in my head how I would explain this if the worst happened. Maybe I could lie, say it was stolen, say I was mugged. But deep down I knew lies would never save me. The truth would bleed out sooner or later, and when it did, the punishment would crush me. My only hope, the only sliver of survival, was to retrieve it before anyone outside my family knew. The city blurred past me in streaks of color and noise. I barely noticed the honking horns or the angry drivers I cut off. My focus was sharp like a blade, locked on one thing: getting to my sister before it was too late. The cafe she had tagged in her photo was only 10 minutes away, but each minute stretched unbearably long, as if the universe itself was punishing me for my carelessness. I could already picture the scene when I arrived. Her smiling, oblivious, the gear sitting vulnerable under bright lights where anyone could see. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. When I walked through that cafe door, nothing between us would ever be the same again. By the time I pulled into the street outside the cafe, my hands were slick with sweat, and my heart felt like it was trying to rip out of my chest. The parking lot was almost full, every space crammed with cars that gleamed under the warm glow of the evening lights. I squeezed into a tight corner spot and killed the engine, sitting there for a second with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't steady. My lungs worked in shallow, ragged bursts. My mind wasn't calm either. It was a storm, filled with flashing images of my sister holding that gear, of military investigators storming into my house, of headlines screaming about negligence and national secrets exposed in broad daylight. I wanted to believe I could walk in, grab it, and walk out without anyone noticing. But I knew better. Nothing about this situation was simple anymore. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the cafe, forcing myself to appear calm, as if I were just another man arriving for dinner. The smell of roasted coffee beans hit me first, mixed with the faint sweetness of pastries drifting through the open doors. People were scattered on the patio, chatting, laughing, sipping drinks that steamed in the cool evening air. My eyes scanned the tables, searching for her. And then I saw her, sitting by the window inside, her date leaning across the table, grinning like he thought the night belonged to him. And there it was, the gear, sitting right between them like it was nothing more than a prop in their little romantic play. I froze for a moment, caught between the desperate need to rush in and the cold fear of what would happen if I drew attention. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to act, but I forced my legs to move slowly, deliberately, carrying me through the door with the same casual stride as the other customers. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the warmth of the cafe wrapped around me, filled with chatter, clinking cups, and soft background music. It felt almost surreal, this normal world carrying on as if nothing was wrong, while in the middle of it sat a device that could change everything. I reached their table in seconds, though it felt like hours. My sister's face lit up with confusion the moment she saw me, her smile faltering. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice playful but edged with suspicion. Her date glanced at me, eyebrows raised, clearly not expecting company. And the gear sat there, reflecting the dim cafe light like a predator waiting for its moment. I forced a smile, though my jaw ached from the effort. "Just passing by," I said, my tone casual, though my eyes never left the device. I reached down, gripping it firmly, slipping it under my arm before either of them could react. My sister frowned, leaning forward. "Hey, that's mine tonight. Borrowed it. What's your problem?" Her words nearly broke me. She said it like she had borrowed a sweater or a piece of jewelry, not something that could end my life if anyone realized it was missing. I bent closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "This is not yours. And it's not a toy. Don't argue. Don't ask questions. Just let me take it home." My tone was sharper than I'd ever used with her before, the kind that cut through her usual defiance. She blinked at me, startled by the intensity in my eyes. Her date, though, wasn't so easily silenced. He chuckled, trying to play it off. "Relax, man. It's just some kind of military gadget, right? She said you loaned it to her. Looks cool, though. Real tactical." The blood in my veins turned to ice. He knew enough to recognize it wasn't ordinary, even if he didn't understand the gravity of it. His casual words could have been overheard by anyone nearby, and suddenly every ear in the cafe felt like a threat. My heart pounded harder. I couldn't let this go on. "We're leaving," I told my sister, my voice low and final. She opened her mouth to argue, but one look at me made her stop. She had seen me angry before, but never like this. She rose reluctantly, muttering something about ruining her night, while her date looked on with confusion and disappointment. I didn't care about his feelings. My entire focus was on the gear tucked under my arm, the weight of it pressing against me like a stone. The walk back to the car was suffocating. My sister trailed behind me, throwing questions that I ignored. "What's the big deal? Why are you acting so crazy? It's just some piece of equipment. You've never been this protective over your stuff before." Her words dug into me, each one a reminder of how little she understood. And I couldn't explain, not here, not where walls had ears. Every passerby felt like a spy, every glance like suspicion. I clenched my jaw, saying nothing until we were safely locked inside the car. The silence stretched as I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The city lights blurred past us, and finally my sister exploded. "You ruined my night. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Do you even know how hard it is to get a decent date in this city? And you show up like some kind of psycho brother, snatching things out of my hands like I'm a child." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the leather digging into my palms. I could feel my composure slipping, the thin thread holding me together fraying with every word she spoke. Finally, I couldn't hold it back. "That thing you took," I said, my voice low and shaking, "is not mine to loan. It is not yours to borrow. It is a classified military asset worth $2 million. Do you understand me? $2 million. And if anyone had realized what you were carrying, if anyone had reported it, I would be finished. Not just my job, my freedom, my life. Do you get that?" Her mouth opened but no sound came out. For the first time that night, she was speechless. I glanced at her, and the color had drained from her face. She stared at me as if I had just told her the sky was falling. "You're joking," she whispered finally, her voice weak. "You're just trying to scare me." I shook my head slowly, my eyes locked on the road. "Do I look like I'm joking?" The rest of the drive was silent. She sat back in her seat, pale and trembling, her usual fire extinguished by the weight of the truth. I could see her processing it, replaying the night in her head, realizing just how close she had come to disaster. The cafe, her date, the way she had paraded it like an accessory, it all came crashing down on her, and on me. Because no matter what, the responsibility wasn't hers. It was mine. I had let it happen. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I killed the engine and sat there in the dark, the gear heavy in my lap. My sister stared straight ahead, her hands gripping her knees, her lips pressed into a thin line. I wanted to yell, to demand why she had touched something that didn't belong to her. But I couldn't. The fear inside me was too strong, swallowing every other emotion. I carried the gear back into the house like it was made of glass, securing it in its case, locking it down tighter than before. My hands shook as I worked the latches, and only when it was sealed again did I finally allow myself to breathe. My sister stood in the doorway, watching, silent. When I turned to face her, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her, like the truth had shrunk her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought it was just, I don't know, something cool. I never would have taken it if I'd known." I believed her. But that didn't erase the danger of what had almost happened. I nodded, too exhausted to argue anymore. "Don't touch my things again," I said simply. She nodded quickly, almost desperately. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the silence. That night I sat on my bed, staring at the case, replaying everything in my mind. The cafe, the photo, the look in her eyes when she realized the truth. I knew this wasn't over. The damage was done, even if nobody else knew yet. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had only been the beginning. The morning after the disaster at the cafe felt like it was wrapped in thick fog, the kind that made even familiar walls look strange and menacing. And though I had slept only a handful of restless hours, my body jolted awake at the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand, its vibration crawling through the silence of the room like a warning. And the moment my eyes caught the screen, I felt my stomach twist into knots. It was a message from my commanding officer, short, clipped, and colder than ice. "Report in immediately." For a second I couldn't breathe, staring at the words as if they were a death sentence, because maybe they were. It was too soon for an inspection, too soon for a random check, and that could only mean one thing. They knew something was wrong, or at the very least they suspected, and suspicion in the military was nearly as deadly as guilt. My first instinct was denial, the childish hope that maybe it had nothing to do with the gear, maybe it was routine, maybe I was overthinking, but deep down my gut screamed the truth. Someone had noticed. I dragged myself out of bed, my legs heavy as if I were walking toward the gallows, my eyes landing on the black case in the corner, locked tighter than ever but no less accusing. And in that moment it felt alive, pulsing with the memory of my sister's hands on it, my own negligence, and the razor-thin line between safety and exposure. My sister's footsteps echoed down the hall, hesitant, and then she appeared in the doorway, her hair messy, her eyes swollen from sleep, her face pale as though the night before had drained every ounce of color from her. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended, telling her I had to go, that I didn't have time for apologies or explanations, and that she was to stay out of my room, out of my things, no matter what. She shrank back, nodded quickly, but the guilt in her expression told me she wasn't just worried for herself anymore. She was terrified for me. Driving to the base felt like marching toward a trial, every mile stretching my nerves tighter, every stoplight whispering that I could turn back, run, disappear, but I kept going because running wasn't an option, not when my life was so bound up in the uniform and the duty I had sworn to uphold. The gates loomed larger than usual, the guards' eyes sharper as if they could see straight through me, and when I stepped inside the briefing room, the air was thick with authority and suspicion, my commanding officer waiting with a stack of papers in front of him and a look that made my skin crawl. He asked about my assignment, my gear, my security protocol, his tone deceptively calm, each question a knife sliding closer to the truth, and I answered carefully, my voice steady though my palms were damp, repeating what I had been taught to say in 1,000 scenarios. Secure, accounted for, no issues. But then he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, and told me there had been chatter, whispers from surveillance teams about unusual sightings in civilian areas, reports of something that looked a lot like military tech showing up in the wrong places, and though nothing had been confirmed, the very idea that someone could have seen the gear outside official hands was enough to light a fuse under an investigation. My throat closed, panic clawing at my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm, to insist that my equipment was locked away at all times, to suggest that maybe civilians had seen something else, mistaken a toy or a replica for the real thing, because that happened more often than people realized. He didn't call me a liar, but the weight of his silence said he wasn't convinced, and then he dismissed me, coldly, warning me to double-check my protocols, because if there was even a hint of negligence, the consequences would be severe. Walking out of that room, my body felt like it was trembling on the inside though my steps stayed steady, and when I got back into my car, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, sweat dripping down my temples, realizing that last night's mistake wasn't buried. It was still alive, creeping closer, ready to devour me if I didn't get ahead of it. Back at home my sister was waiting, pacing the living room like a nervous child, and when I walked in, she rushed to me, blurting out apologies, swearing she hadn't meant to cause trouble, that she hadn't known, that she just wanted to borrow something she thought looked cool. And I stopped her with a raised hand, too drained for her tears, telling her the damage was already done because someone had seen, someone had reported, and now I was on the edge of losing everything. She covered her face with her hands, whispering that she was sorry over and over. But sorry wasn't enough to erase the image of my commanding officer's suspicious eyes, or the possibility that an investigation team could show up at any moment. That night I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could barely breathe, because every sound outside the window felt like boots on gravel, every car slowing on the street felt like surveillance, and when I finally sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the black case again, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Locking it away wasn't enough anymore, because the real danger wasn't just the device. It was the memory of it being out in the world, in my sister's hands, in plain sight. If one photo had made it to the wrong eyes, if one passerby had snapped a picture and uploaded it, there was nothing I could do to control that, nothing I could do to erase it, and the thought of that kind of exposure gnawed at me like a wolf at my ribs. I needed a plan, something to cover the gap, something to convince the military that nothing had ever gone wrong, but no matter how I twisted it in my head, the truth loomed larger, unavoidable, waiting for the moment when it would break me open. My sister knocked softly on the door before slipping inside, her voice barely above a whisper as she told me she had deleted the photo, deleted every trace, told her date not to share anything, swore it was gone forever, but I shook my head, because once something had touched the internet, once a device had been seen, it was never truly gone, and besides, her date had already spoken, already joked aloud about some kind of military gadget. And that alone could be enough to spark suspicion in the wrong ear. I told her as much, and she sank into the chair across from me, hugging her knees, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally understanding the full scope of what she had done. We sat there in silence, the weight between us heavy, and though part of me wanted to comfort her, another part couldn't, because this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was survival, and survival demanded distance, demanded control, demanded sacrifice. Outside, the night stretched long and unkind, and with every tick of the clock, I felt the walls closing in tighter, the shadows pressing harder, the truth whispering louder. No matter how hard I tried, what happened was already out there, and sooner or later, the consequences would find me. The following days unfolded like a tightening noose, each hour pulling the rope closer to my throat. And though I tried to keep my routine as steady and disciplined as always, nothing felt normal anymore. Every sound, every glance, every unexpected phone call sent my pulse into overdrive, and the black case in the corner of my room had turned from a symbol of duty into a silent executioner, waiting for the moment it would betray me. My sister, once so careless and loud, now moved around the house like a ghost, whispering apologies with her eyes even when her lips stayed closed, watching me with guilt that weighed heavier than words. I thought the worst of it was the fear of my superiors discovering the truth, but then another problem began to grow in the shadows. The boy she had been on that date with, the one who had seen the gear, who had heard her brag about borrowing it, who had already made an offhand comment in public that could have been overheard by anyone. At first, I dismissed him as harmless, just another shallow face in her string of failed romances, but when my sister confessed that he had been texting her, asking questions about me, about that cool-looking military thing she had shown him, my blood froze in my veins. He wanted to see it again. He said it looked like something important, and he half-joked that maybe he could show it to a friend of his who worked in tech. That was no harmless boy. That was a liability, a loose thread that could unravel everything if he pulled too hard. I grabbed my sister's phone, read his words myself, each one searing into my brain like fire, and I told her in the firmest voice I'd ever used that she was done with him, that she was to block him, delete him, erase him from her life entirely. She hesitated, protested weakly that he would think she was crazy, but when she saw the terror in my eyes, she obeyed. Still, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. People who got a taste of something forbidden rarely let go without a fight. That night, I barely slept, listening to the creaks of the house, convinced that any moment there would be a knock at the door. Soldiers in dark uniforms demanding explanations, or worse, strangers looking to get their hands on the thing my sister had flaunted so carelessly. By morning, my fears proved less like paranoia and more like prophecy, because as I was heading out the door for base, I noticed a car parked across the street, one I hadn't seen before, a plain sedan with tinted windows that reflected the morning sun too perfectly. It didn't move when I drove past, didn't move when I circled the block, and though I told myself it could have belonged to anyone, the hair on the back of my neck prickled with the certainty that someone was watching. At base, the tension deepened. My commanding officer called another meeting. His questions sharper this time, asking about specific timelines, about where my equipment had been stored, about whether I had noticed anything unusual in the last 72 hours, and though my answers came smooth and steady, rehearsed like a soldier under interrogation, I could feel suspicion thickening in the air around me, pressing against my skin like heat. He didn't accuse me, not outright, but his warning was clearer this time. Something was surfacing, reports from civilians that didn't align with official protocols, and the higher-ups were preparing to dig deeper. Walking out of that office, my stomach churned with acid, because I knew the dig would eventually uncover what I was desperate to keep buried. I drove home faster than I should have, every red light an enemy, every car in the rearview mirror a phantom tail, and when I pulled into the driveway, my sister rushed to meet me at the door, her face pale with panic. She said the boy had shown up at the house earlier, knocking, calling her name, demanding she explain why she had suddenly cut him off, and when she refused to answer, he had lingered outside for nearly an hour before finally driving away. My mind spun with fury and dread, because that boy wasn't just curious anymore. He was suspicious, and suspicion in the wrong hands could spread like wildfire. I told her to pack a bag and stay with a friend for a while, somewhere far from here, anywhere but this house, because I couldn't risk her being followed, questioned, or tricked into revealing anything more. She cried, begged me not to send her away, but I was unshakable. This was bigger than her tears, bigger than her pride. After she left, the house felt colder, emptier, the silence louder, and I sat staring at the case in the corner, my mind circling one terrible realization. I couldn't keep this charade up forever. If the investigation kept closing in, if the boy kept sniffing around, if even one photo or detail reached the wrong ears, everything would implode. And so, for the first time since this nightmare began, I considered something I never thought I'd consider. I wondered if the only way to protect myself, to protect her, was to destroy the very thing I had sworn to guard. The thought made me sick, because it was more than a machine, it was trust, it was duty, it was the weight of my oath. And to break it would mean betraying not just my uniform but everything I stood for. Yet as the hours dragged on, as I sat in the half-dark of my room with the shadows stretching long across the walls, that thought refused to leave, gnawing at me, whispering that maybe destruction was safer than discovery. My hands trembled at the idea, at the image of dismantling something worth $2 million, something that wasn't mine to destroy, but fear twisted logic until it almost seemed reasonable. That night, sleep never came. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint rustle of wind against the windows, and all of it felt like a countdown, each sound another second slipping away until the inevitable came crashing down. The morning of reckoning came not with explosions or sirens, but with a silence so heavy it made the air in the house feel thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what I would do. And though I had rehearsed 100 scenarios in my mind, burning the case, burying it, running away, I found myself paralyzed, staring at the matte black box in the corner of my room like it was a coffin holding my fate inside. My sister was gone, tucked away at a friend's place, but her absence didn't soothe me. If anything, it made me feel more exposed, more vulnerable, like the only line of defense I had left had been pulled away. I knew the investigation was closing in because the messages on my secure line were sharper, more frequent, and though they hadn't accused me outright, every word carried the bite of suspicion. Reports of leaks, unauthorized sightings of classified gear, inconsistencies in the logs. My name wasn't spoken, but I felt it hovering just beneath the surface, ready to be dragged out and pinned down the moment someone connected the dots. By mid-afternoon, the unease in my chest had curdled into certainty, because the same sedan I had seen earlier in the week was parked across the street again, its windows dark and unreadable, its engine off yet its presence screaming louder than any alarm, and my instincts told me this wasn't just a coincidence. It was surveillance, deliberate and patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. My hands shook as I moved through the house, trying to decide whether to run or confess, to hide or to fight. But before I could settle on a choice, the knock came, heavy and precise, 3 raps against the door that rattled through my bones. For a heartbeat, I considered not answering, but soldiers don't get that luxury. I squared my shoulders, opened the door, and came face to face with 2 men in plain clothes whose posture and gaze screamed military even without the uniforms. They didn't raise their voices or shove their way inside. They simply asked, firmly but calmly, if they could step in, and though every instinct screamed to slam the door, I moved aside, letting the inevitable seep into my living room like cold air. They sat across from me, their eyes cutting into mine, and began asking questions I had already practiced answering 100 times. Had I noticed anything unusual? Had anyone outside the chain of command seen or touched restricted equipment? Had I stored everything properly? And though I gave my careful denials, rehearsed and steady, I could feel their doubt pressing harder with every word. Then came the question that shattered the script. Do you know a young man named Alex Rivers? The boy from my sister's date. My stomach turned to lead. I asked why, feigning ignorance, but they explained he had made a call, an anonymous tip, claiming to have seen advanced military gear in civilian hands, describing it in enough detail that it couldn't be dismissed as imagination. My heart pounded against my ribs so violently I thought they might see it, but I forced my voice calm and said I didn't know the name, that it didn't ring a bell, but I knew then and there that the lie could only hold so long. If they had his statement, they would follow the trail back to my sister, and from her directly to me. The men exchanged glances, subtle but telling, and I realized they already suspected. They weren't here to gather clues, they were here to confirm what they already believed. For a long moment the silence stretched, and then one of them leaned forward and said something that made my breath hitch. We're giving you a chance to come clean before this gets out of your hands. It was the last mercy I would be offered. My mind spun in chaos, confess and face ruin, or keep lying and hope the cracks didn't cave in. But in that swirl of panic, my eyes drifted to the corner, to the black case that had caused all of this, and I realized there was no escaping the truth anymore, not without dragging my sister down with me. Not without burying both of us under the weight of my silence. My throat tightened, my vision blurred, and before I could stop myself, the words spilled out. I told them everything. Not the whole story, not the humiliating detail of my sister borrowing it for a date, but enough. That the equipment had been taken out of my custody briefly, without authorization, that it had been seen by someone who shouldn't have seen it, that I had tried to contain the mistake but had failed. Their faces didn't change, no sympathy, no anger. Just the cold professionalism of men who had heard confessions before, and they stood without a word, moving to secure the case. Watching them lift it, carry it out of my house like it was just another object instead of the burden that had been crushing me, I felt a strange mix of relief and despair, as if a weight had been lifted only to reveal the broken bones underneath. When they left, one of them paused at the door and said flatly that my commanding officer would be in touch, that disciplinary action was inevitable. And then they were gone, the car outside finally starting its engine and rolling away with everything I had destroyed. Alone in the silence, I sank onto the couch, my body trembling with exhaustion, my mind numb, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, but silent tears that burned with a sting of failure, of shame, of the knowledge that I had betrayed the uniform I had sworn to honor. Hours later, my sister returned, her face pale, her eyes swollen from worry, and when I told her what had happened, she broke down, sobbing apologies that filled the room, saying she had never meant for this to spiral so far, that she had thought it was just a piece of gear, just a harmless thrill to impress someone. I held her as she cried, not with anger but with a hollow kind of forgiveness, because though her mistake had sparked the fire, it was my duty to keep it from spreading, and in that duty I had failed. The following weeks blurred together in a haze of hearings, paperwork, and disciplinary reviews. They stripped me of certain clearances, reassigned me to desk duty, and though they didn't discharge me outright, perhaps out of mercy, perhaps out of pragmatism, the stain on my record would follow me forever. I had lost trust, lost standing, lost the sharp edge of pride that had once defined me, and though I wore the uniform still, it felt heavier now, more like penance than honor. My sister stayed close during those weeks, helping where she could, offering words that didn't heal but at least softened the silence. And though our bond carried scars now, it also carried truth. We knew the cost of carelessness, of secrets, of silence. In the end, life didn't end with a bang or an explosion, but with a quiet realization that not every war is fought on battlefields. Some are fought in living rooms, in whispers, in the weight of choices we make when no one is watching. And as I stood one evening by the window, watching the sun sink low over the horizon, I understood that though I had lost much, I hadn't lost everything. I still had my sister, still had the chance to carry on, to rebuild, to live with a lesson carved deep into me. That one careless moment, one borrowed cheap thing, could cost more than money ever could. It could cost trust, duty, and the fragile threads of family. And that was how my story ended, not in triumph, not in glory, but in survival, in a quiet kind of endurance, carrying forward the scar of a $2 million mistake that would haunt me for the rest of my days. Backhand index pointing right if you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more thrilling twists and unforgettable tales.